Hello, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to our April Training Tuesday event for OU Campus. Today's topic is archiving your RSS feeds. We're going to be covering how to archive old feeds and news items in order to improve load times, organization, and storage on your website. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as the session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of your webinar screen. For those attendees who have been coming to our Training Tuesdays for a while, we're aware that this is a new interface that might take a little getting used to, so don't hesitate to ask us questions. If you want to exit full screen, hover over the top of your screen, click View Options, and select the option for exiting full screen. We'll attempt to address all questions during the presentation. After the formal presentation is ended, there will also be a Q&A where we will review and answer all remaining questions. Your presenter today is Brandon Scheirman, software trainer at OmniUpdate. Brandon, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Erica. Hope everyone can hear me all right. Like Erica said, we're going to be talking about archiving your RSS feeds today. This is a topic that I have presented on at OUTC 2 years running now. So this is just kind of a chance for those of you who weren't able to make it to the conference this year, or maybe who weren't in my workshop on it. This will be a chance for you to learn a little bit more about how you can use RSS and OU Campus to your advantage. We'll be kind of building off of the basic principles of how RSS works in OU Campus already today, so hopefully you have a bit of an understanding of how that works, because we're going to be kind of building upon that kind of basic knowledge. But yeah, we're mostly going to just focus in the interface today and see how we can archive RSS feeds to make life better across a variety of facets. So our agenda today, I'm going to just do a very quick overview of the basic building blocks of RSS for those of you who might want a little bit of a refresher. And then once that is kind of done, we're going to be talking about why we need to archive and what the kind of the issue is without doing it. And then we'll talk about the general steps that you would take to actually archive your RSS feeds. We'll just have the basic steps here in the PowerPoint, but we'll actually be doing a live demo of it from start to finish inside of an example environment. And then, as Erica said, at the end, we'll have more of a Q&A session at the end of it. So let's talk a little bit about building blocks for your RSS feeds. The general principle is that there are three main components of an RSS feed, and the schematic on the right-hand side kind of speaks to this. So you have, first of all, that first item on the top is your RSS feed, which is an XML file that lives on your production server that people can subscribe to with a feed reader, or for example, Firefox has a feed reader built into it, so you can just travel to the XML file and you'll get the ability to kind of see a nice little interface for it instead of it just being raw code. From a more conceptual standpoint, the RSS feed is really a container file for items. If you have been to my workshop at OUTC, you'll know that I'll use kind of a silly example that the RSS feed is like a cardboard box with a label on it. If the cardboard box is empty, it's not super valuable on its own. But the box with the label on the outside kind of tells you what to expect that's inside of the box, but really you're wanting to open up the box and see what's inside. That's the more important stuff. So the stuff that is in the metaphorical box is what we refer to as items. And generally speaking, an item is just one of these item tags that live within the XML of your RSS feed. And each item refers to an individual article. But it's important to understand that the item itself is not the full article. It's kind of the teaser information for the article. So going back to the metaphor of the cardboard box with the stuff inside of it, the things that are inside of the cardboard box I like to call like tin cans, or like, cans of soup or something like that. The outside of the can of the soup has, a label that tells you what kind of soup it is. It has the nutrition facts. It tells you the expiration date, all of the crucial information that you should know before you actually open up the can of soup and start eating it. So you can imagine that the RSS item in the metaphor is just the can. You're not truly eating the can. You're eating what's inside of the can, but the can tells you important information about what's inside. just kind of like how the box tells you what's inside of the box. So RSS feeds and RSS items all live within the actual XML document, which is why they're blue in my little schematic to the right. And then the items reference articles. And the articles are actual HTML web pages that are simply referenced by the RSS item. You can see this as this is the full story. This is the actual page that you're going to when you go to an RSS item and click on the link or whatnot. It's going to take you to the actual article page. So each one of these articles is its own HTML document that is just associated with the item, but not actually residing inside of the XML file. So that's kind of the general principle for how RSS works overall, not even just inside of OU Campus, just kind of overall. That's generally how it goes. And then there's one other thing that OU Campus allows us to do that kind of takes this whole idea a step further, and that's by creating what we call a feed group. So as you can see from this schematic, things are a little bit different now. So you still have your items referencing articles, and they're all kind of contained within feeds still. But what a feed group can do is it can take all of the items that belong to multiple feeds, and it will aggregate them together and treat all of those items as if they belong to one large feed. So the items, for example, these first three items over here, they still belong to feed number 1, but they also belong to this master feed group that is aggregating all of the things from feed 1, feed 2, and feed 3. So this is another thing that not all RSS does, but we have this in OU Campus. And as we get later on into the whole concept of archiving, we're going to be applying the concept of feed groups to our solution as well. So if you've never played around with feed groups, this might be a fun chance for you to kind of see what they're capable of. I'm assuming that most of you are probably at least familiar with the basic schematic that we saw over here on my first slide. So with all of that in mind, that's kind of the basics of what OU Campus lets us do from a structure standpoint of the RSS. Now let's talk about why we want to archive in the first place. The main reason is that RSS feeds have a maximum number of items that they can contain. There is a parameter that you'll adjust when you create a new RSS feed that is called item count. And when you put a number in there, that establishes the maximum number of items that can live within that feed. If you hit that upper limit, say the item count is 100, and you already have 100 items in your feed, the minute that you make item number 101, what that will do is it'll put it into the feed, but then the oldest of the existing 100 items is going to essentially disappear. It'll be removed from the feed. So if you hit that upper limit, you may run into a situation where you will lose news articles in the XML file itself. And if they're not in the XML file, they can't be referenced by any of your scripting or anything like that. Or they can't be referenced by feed readers because the feed readers are looking at the contents of that XML file. So the first situation is you may, if you have just one large feed that contains all of your news items across multiple years, you may run into that upper limit of your item count and you don't have a full archive anymore. Things have been kind of lost into the web. So that's kind of one issue where archiving can help resolve that. Another issue is that if you have all of your news items in one big feed, the more items that an RSS feed has, the scripts that display those feed on a page potentially might need to work harder. They might need to parse through a larger amount of items, which increases page load times because the script has to read all of the items first and then display, whichever ones that you're telling it to. So if you are referencing a feed that has 1,000 items, that's potentially going to take a longer amount of time than referencing a feed that has 100, for example. So that's another thing to consider. And then finally, it might also be difficult to view items from several years ago if your items live in one feed. So if the example goes where you have a landing page for your news that just lists all of your news items, and you want to find a news article from maybe 2 years ago, you're going to have to clicking next, 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 next on the pagination a whole bunch of times potentially in order to find the articles that date back that far. So if you really need to reference an article from that long ago, it may be difficult or time consuming or tedious if all of your items are in one feed and your display options are a little more limited in that regard. So those are a couple of the example reasons why you might find it necessary to archive, or you might want to be archiving your RSS feeds. So now let's actually talk about how we do this. So the solution of archiving. So what we're going to do is we're going to assume or come from a standpoint at the beginning of all of your items live in one feed. And what we're going to do is we're going to, from this point onwards, make a new feed for every year. So instead of just one master feed, I would have news-2018. And then I would have eventually news-2019, news-2012, or 2020, so on and so forth, where every year gets a brand new feed. This does a couple things. It limits the number of items that will live in a single feed, because I'm only limited by the items that I create in the 365-day period of 2018, for example. And that can be better for page loads, because fewer items means that we have a guarantee that fewer things are going to need to be processed by my scripts. And potentially, that also means that we have a dedicated feed for every year, which might make it easier for me to browse amongst the news items that happened during that year. So that's kind of our first step, is we're going to make a new feed for every year instead of putting everything into just one large feed. Our second step is we're going to also make dedicated year folders inside of the news directory. So if I'm going on the assumption now that I just have a news directory somewhere on my site and I'm just dumping all of my news articles in there, that's going to be really hard to navigate on the staging server eventually. So let's make another level of organization to have yearly folders, and that way I could more easily see, here's the news articles that happened in 2018 versus here's the articles that happened in 2015, for example. And then third of all, now that we have a situation where we have a new news feed every year, we might get into this weird situation at the end of a calendar year where we've got all of these items in our 2018 feed, but then we've just made our brand new 2019 feed, but since it's December 30th, we haven't made any news articles that have happened in 2019 just yet. So when I make that transition switch, I want to make sure that that transition is smooth to where visitors on my site will be able to see items that happened at the beginning of January 2019, but also items that were in the beginning of the end of 2018. So it doesn't seem like a jarring switch from one to the other. So what we can do is we can leverage feed groups to aggregate multiple years worth of feeds together and display all of them as if they belong to one big feed. So we still have that nice, easy transition that we still do when all of our items live in a single feed, as they currently do. So that can contain fewer items as well to further speed up page loads on landing pages and things like that. So there's some other advantages to using feed groups, but the idea is we're using feed groups to smooth the year-over-year transition, so we don't cause more problems if we take this archiving approach. So that's kind of the three-step process to keep it really brief. But let's take those steps, keep them in the back of our mind, and actually do that in OU Campus so we can see how that process is working. So what I've got here is I have my OU Campus test environment pulled up here, and you can see that I've got a news directory that's right off of the root of my site. So this is just a state of news right now. I have just a news folder, and it's got a bunch of articles in here. So these PCF files are the HTML articles that I was referencing in the PowerPoint. I look at one of these, it's going to give me just the full article. All that stuff is, pretty standard stuff. But no, I notice that I have no organization here. As time goes on and on and on, I'm going to have more and more articles in this directory, and it's going to sort it alphabetically. I'm not even going to have a great idea of, when those articles were created or anything like that, aside from just being able to sort by the modified date. So from just an OU Campus user's perspective, it might be hard to navigate this folder as I make more and more news items. Now, if I also want to see what things look like from an RSS perspective, I can go up to Content RSS, and I can see that I just have one feed, and it is called news.xml, really simple stuff. And if I go in here and I look at the items, we can see that, there's all of my items in here. In this test example, they all happen to be from the same calendar year, but, as time goes on and on, I could make more articles that happened in 2018, and they would still just be dumped into this folder. So this is what we have right now. Let's go ahead and change it up so we can set ourselves up to archive from this point forward. So what I'm going to do is my first step is I'm going to create more RSS feeds, one for every year, just like we talked about. So I would just go in here and say, let's make a new feed. And just like any feed that I would make normally, I'm just going to define where it's going to live on the production server. I'll just keep it in the RSS folder. And let's just call it 2018-news.xml. So that way it's not only clear from a mental perspective, but also just the file name itself tells me what year this archive is going to apply to. Okay, so I've done that. I'll make my generic MRSS template, and we'll just call this 2018 news, all the news from 2018. Just put in a link here. This link is different than the links that's referencing the actual articles themselves. I'll just put, kind of a placeholder in here. But really, down here at the bottom, this is where that item count parameter comes into play that I talked about earlier. So the item count right now is set to 15 by default, which means that I can only have 15 articles in this feed. Obviously, I want that number to be larger. So just to be safe, I could potentially just enter in this maximum value of 9,999. And that will just ensure that I'm not going to make that many news items in the span of a single calendar year. And so I can guarantee from this standpoint that there's no way I'm going to hit that upper limit for this calendar year. And once this calendar year is done, I'm never going to add any more items into this folder, which is great. That way I preserve all of those items and nothing ends up getting kicked out later on down the road. So I've made my RSS feed. It now is showing up here nicely. And just to be forward thinking and future focused, I'm going to just make one for 2019 while I'm here already. I don't have to do this right now. I could wait until, November, December when I get closer to the calendar year, but I'm here. I might as well just right now. So we'll just repeat that step for my 2019-news. Oops. 2019news.xml. And we'll just go in here and kind of do the same thing I just did. And same idea here, I'm going to max out my item count, or at least make it larger than 15, to just ensure that all of the RSS items that I create in that calendar year, none of them accidentally get kicked off after we hit the upper limit of my item count. Okay, so with that all said and done, we now have 2 feeds for my respective years. And if I want, I can just publish these both right now, just to make sure that the empty feeds exist on the production server. Now, for those of you who have never seen what an RSS feed looks like, the actual XML file, I figured this is a fun chance to just show that really quick. So this is my current RSS feed, just the standard news one. So we can see here that I've got some basic information about the feed right up here. But then underneath that, I've got these item tags. Each one of these item tags corresponds to one of those articles. So I can see that each item's got a title, it's got a link, it's got a description. The publish date tells me when that page or when that article was published, all that sort of stuff. So we're still going to have all of this structure for our yearly feeds. If I hop over to 2018-news real quick, we can see that right now 2018 news exists. It lives on the production server. I just don't have any items in there yet. And that's because I've created my feeds, but my next step is I actually have to assign those feeds to a portion of my site so they're able to have stuff go inside of them. So that's going to be our next step. Now that we've made the feeds, we're going to tell the system to actually put stuff in those feeds. So back in OU Campus, I'm now going to go to the Pages List view. And inside of the News folder, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to actually make a new news directory for my 2018 items. So that way I have a clear hierarchy from the RSS feed perspective, but I also have a clear hierarchy inside of OU Campus when I'm making my items as well. So inside of news, I'm going to go in here and make a new news section. And I'm just going to call the directory 2018. So presumably all the articles that I make in that calendar year are going to go into the 2018 folder. And I'll just call it 2018 as well. Create. And now I've got this nice, really standard index page that's blank. And I've got a side navigation file if I wanted to have each article have its own item in the navigation. But now I can go through here and I can just make some items. But before I make items, I've only created a folder in OU Campus. This folder in OU Campus is not what's controlling which feed the items go to. I'm going to go into the access settings for this folder now. And I'm going to scroll down to the RSS feed option. The RSS feed option is how we in OU Campus control what feed the items get placed in. So if it says no feed right here, I physically am not able to create an RSS item based upon a page that lives in this directory. I need to first assign the feed and then make my items. So you can kind of see step one of the process is making the feeds in OU Campus first. And then the second phase is really kind of, phase, it's part 2.1 and then 2.2. The first part is I can optionally create these folders like I just did in OU Campus to just give myself some more organization. And then my next step is I'm going to go to the access settings of that folder and I'm going to assign the appropriate yearly feed to that folder. So by assigning the 2018 news feed to my 2018 folder, every item that I create inside of the 2018 folder is going to automatically go into the 2018 news feed. So let's go ahead and repeat that process for my 2019 stuff. So I'll just go back to the directory of news and just repeat that process. Now for a different year. Cool, that's looking fine. We're done with that. Go back to the access settings for the folder. And wait for it to load here for a second. Let's try that again. There we go. So once again, gonna go down here and I'm gonna say RSS feed. Instead of no feed, I want it to be my 2019 feed. Sweet. So we've got everything set up and now my content editors can go through and make items to their heart's content. Since I don't have any content editors easily at my disposal, I will go ahead and be my own content editor this time. I'm going to make a couple items in 2018 and we're going to go from there, okay? So inside of the 2018 folder, I can hit the new button and once again, I get the option to, now I get to create news item templates. So I'll just use the standard news item one for right now. And I'm going to go ahead and just say Brandon makes an item. And just for purposes later on down the road, I'm going to put it parentheses 2018 here, just so we can be sure what year this one was meant to go, what year it was meant to belong for. You obviously won't need to do that when you are making your own in your site because you'll have more than an hour to replicate 2 years worth of news items. But hopefully the idea still comes across pretty easily. This is the first article for the 2018 newsfeed. And I could go in here and say, important news goes here. So of course, everybody's news template might look a little bit different. You might not have like these summary and body fields in the template itself. Realistically, at this point, it doesn't matter all that much. Whatever your templates are, they're going to work with the RSS feeds that we've created. At this point, it's just more of a matter of preference. If I wanted to, I could put in some tags here. So maybe I could just say, you know, featured or something like that. You know, all of the standard functions that you're used to using with RSS are working here. Maybe I'll call it tags of Brandon, just because I'm, you know, feeling a little narcissistic today, I guess. Okay, and then we'll just make a file name. First news item in 2018. Alrighty. So I've now created the page. We can see that the PCF is created. It just is a normal web page here. And as the second phase of all of this, I can go to the properties of the page and notice that I have this new item here that's called RSS. If I were in a place where I had not assigned my RSS feed beforehand, I wouldn't see this. So this is kind of one way that I can confirm that, yes, I assigned the RSS feed to this directory because I can look at my item there. While I'm looking at this, I have a question here from Sarah. She was asking, if one has a huge list of articles in one big feed, is there a way to retroactively move items and articles into feeds and directories for a year? It's a great question, Sarah. We're going to probably talk about that once I'm done kind of showing this whole process. We'll kind of come back and figure out, all right, what's your solution for if you already have a bunch of items and you want to archive those too? Effectively, you can almost do the same thing that we're doing here. You just might need to modify the items themselves a little bit here and there, but we'll hopefully answer that in greater detail a little bit later on in the webinar. But great question, and I appreciate it. So coming back to just what we're doing from here on out, at this point, I have an RSS item that is associated with my web page. And if I click on the item, I can see that here's some basic information about the page itself. Everything's looking pretty good at this point. I've got my tags, I've got my title, my description, all of that stuff is looking great. What I want to do here is I'm going to just publish this page, and by publishing the page, it's also going to publish the RSS item, meaning that we're actually going to get some news showing up in our feeds. So with all of that published, we can see that the item has a new publish date here, and we also have the page itself being published. One thing I haven't done yet is I haven't actually published the home page or the navigation for these files yet, so I'm going to just do that right now. And let me just, while I'm here, repeat that process for 2019. And make sure the navigation is all updated. Okay, sweet. That was just a little bit of behind the scenes work there. So now that we've created a new item inside of the 2018 RSS feed, I wanted to just really quickly go back to the Brandon.ou demo 2018 news XML file. So this is the same raw XML file that we were looking at earlier, but now we can see that instead of just this basic information, which we saw, now we have a physical item that lives in here. And the physical item that lives in here is the thing that I just created with my template. So we can confirm that once again, yes, we are now putting items in the feeds that they belong. And if I went back to my general news feed, the one that is not filtered by year, I can see that there is not any extra item for the one that I just created showing up here. So a good thing to keep in mind with the way that it works in OU Campus is that items can only belong to one feed at a time. So if I had an item that belonged to my 2018 feed, it's not going to belong to any other feed that lives within my system. So that almost kind of talks a little bit about Sarah's question where she was asking, like, can I put stuff in feeds retroactively by year? And the answer is yes. You can effectively just move it out of the existing feed and move it into the new one, and that will switch it over from one feed to another. So what I could do at this point is I could, maybe make another article inside of 2019, and I'll go through this one a little more quickly so we can kind of get through this, but just want to kind of fill out some more items. It's the future. So exciting. I'll tag this one with future. All right, I'll call this one just simply 2019 item. Cool. There's that. Go back to properties, go to RSS. We can see my RSS item lives there. I can go there and see what's going on with it. Everything is looking pretty fine. And we'll just publish this one as well. Cool. So it'll be easier to just go from here. Okay, so 2018 news still has just a single item in it. Now if I go to 2019 news, has a single item. That's the one that I just created. And things are looking pretty good. So at this point, what I could do is I could kind of be done now. Like, what we've done is we've established the archiving to where moving forward, I can just make more and more items into each of these separate feeds and everything will look great. However, we still run into the issue of displaying those feeds. So what's going to happen here is if I go to my homepage, you'll notice that, for example, on the homepage, I have this little news section. And the news section right now is displaying information from my big news feed. What I want to do is I want to switch it from displaying my big news feed to displaying items from the current year. So this is where this is going to be different for everybody. Some people are going to have page parameters that handle this. Some people may have snippets. Some people may have assets. We actually, in this test environment, it's controlled directly through the XSL, which is not super user-friendly. But most people don't do that anymore. So, don't worry too much the fact that I'm going into the XSL here. I just want to basically change it to where this on the home page of the published page is changed up to display a different feed. Because like I was kind of been talking about in the past, you can only display one feed at a time. Just like one item can only belong to one feed, only one feed can be displayed at a time when we're doing it on like the home page, or we have like a snippet that lets us do a similar thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the XSL for my home page, and I'm going to go down to my news, and you can see here that this little chunk of news right here is what displays this chunk of news right here. And effectively, whether I'm doing this in a snippet or an asset or directly in the XSL, there's going to be some ability for me to choose a feed to display. And the feed that I choose here is going to be the one that actually displays on the page. So right now you can see that it's pulling from just my standard news.xml. Well, what I can do is I can go in here and I could say, don't display news.xml, display 2018 news.xml. And in doing so, here, let me just update the size of this text, but keep my zoom fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my homepage itself and just republish that to get the new information on the published page. Okay, so now that that's been done, if we go back to the published page and I just simply hit refresh, now we can see that I am displaying all of my 2018 things. Now, if we mentally fast forward for a little bit and it's December 31st and tomorrow is going to be 2019, well, under what we've already learned and discovered, I would want to go back to the XSL and I would want to go and change this from 2018 news to 2019 news. And I could save it and publish the page again. And then once, January 1st, 2019 rolls around, I hit refresh, and now I'm going to see my 2019 items. However, it's not as if my 2018 items aren't useful anymore. I mean, they just happened yesterday, for example. This is where we're coming into that issue of establishing that kind of smooth transition that I mentioned in the PowerPoints. If we don't have the smooth transition, we have this hard cutoff where we're saying display 2018 and then flip a switch, and now we're only displaying 2019, which can be problematic when you are switching over calendar years because that new newsfeed may not have very many items inside of it. And so you're all of a sudden showing very little, and it might confuse your web visitors and things like that. So this is where we kind of take that archiving idea and bring it to the next level with feed groups so we can smooth that transition over. So let's go back into OU Campus for a second. Inside of OU Campus, I'm actually going to go back up to Content RSS. And I've created my feeds. Those are all great. But I can also go to the left-hand side and select Groups. And this allows me to make a feed group. And I had some test ones in here already. Haha, you saw what I was going to do. I can create a feed group that aggregates multiple years. So making an RSS feed group is almost the exact same as making a feed. I just go here, I say new. I still have to define a path. So what I could do is I could call this all news. Or maybe all year news. All years news.xml. I would still choose the RSS template. I would still make the title all the news from all the years. So all of this stuff is the same. I also still have to have an item count. Now at this point you might be like, hey, wait, Brandon, if there's an item count, doesn't that mean that we're gonna, shove some items away once they hit the upper limit? The answer to that is technically yes. But the good thing about the feed group is that the items don't actually belong to the feed group itself. The feed group is just kind of reading them and displaying them in their feed as if it's theirs. But realistically, the items themselves are still contained within those yearly feeds that we made earlier that have the maxed out item counts. So even if we make a small item count here, that only determines what shows up in my feed group, but it doesn't kick the items out of the individual feeds themselves, which is a good thing. So if I know that this news feed is only meant for things like my homepage display, where I really need at maximum maybe 10 items shown at any one time, I can leave this item count really small because I have the confidence that it's not going to remove the items themselves. So I'm actually going to keep this item count really small, and that means that at maximum, any script that I have only needs to parse through 15 items, absolutely maximum, instead of hundreds potentially. So now that I've done this, the thing that makes a feed group different is that I have this extra panel where I can say, what feeds do we want to aggregate? So I'm going to say, aggregate my 2018 and my 2019 feeds. And now when I hit create, I have a feed group. Notice that also when I hover over a feed group, I don't see any ability to view the items that belong to the feed group. Same idea. It's because the items don't actually belong to the group. They belong to the individual yearly feeds we already made. So now I'm going to publish this RSS feed. And I'm going to go back to my raw data, because the raw data is kind of fun to see. And now I want to see what that feed group looks like. So this is what 2019 looks like. There's just a single item. And if I went back to 2018, same idea, just a single item in there, right there. Now let's see what happens when I look for all years-news.xml. Same idea. It's still just a raw XML feed, RSS item status. But now look at this. I've got two items. I've got my 2019 one, and then right underneath it, I've got my 2018 one. So this is just taking all of those items from the feeds that we're aggregating and just displaying them chronologically. I made my, reverse chronological order. I made my 2018 item first, and then I made my 2019 item. And you can see that the pub date is a couple minutes off from one another. So, 11:31 versus 11:28 in the morning. So it's just taking all of those and displaying them chronologically. Well, great. Now we've got a feed that shows multiple years worth of stuff. I can now, instead of using my yearly feeds to actually display stuff, I can just use my feed group. So watch this. All years news.xml. We'll save that. Go back to my homepage, publish that one more time. And then if I go back to the live site and hit refresh, now we get to see multiple years worth of items all in one feed, nice smooth transition. And the best part about it is that if I have that RSS group that is aggregating multiple years, it's always going to show me the most recent stuff, regardless of whether, where it is in the calendar year or how many feeds it's aggregating. It's just going to sort it chronologically. So what's kind of cool about that is I realistically never need to change this feed again, just kind of like what we did before we did any of this archiving stuff. I never needed to change this away from just news.xml. I never need to change my asset or my snippet to pull from anything else other than all years news, because we'll just continue to add more feeds to that feed group as the calendar years progress. So making feed groups to aggregate multiple years worth of feeds is a really cool process that can kind of take that archiving to a really good level from a practical standpoint. Now, when it comes to displaying RSS items in other locations, there's a couple other things that we can leverage, and I'll just touch on these pretty quickly. The concept is pretty easy. So if I go back to my news directory, we can see that, I've still got my 2018 and my 2019 folders here. And if I go in here, of course, I'm going to have all of these items that belong to those folders, but then I'm going to have an index page for those directories as well. Well, here's what I can do with this index page. I could have the index page of the 2018 folder show me all of the items that are happening in 2018. So I can use my yearly feeds for display purposes where it's relevant. So I don't need to care what happens in 2017 or 2019 when I'm inside of the 2018 folder. So I could grab a snippet or grab an asset or a page parameter or any of those types of things and just show the 2018 news feed right here. So I'll just quickly demonstrate that in my test environment. Like I said, this is going to be different for everybody, but let me just go ahead and copy an existing asset. Let's do 2018 news. And I'll just go in here, and this is just a simple source code asset that tells me to fetch all of the RSS items from a particular feed. And just kind of the same idea as what I was doing before. Instead of having it pull from my generic news feed, I'm going to have it pull from my 2018 news feed. And then this little comma here just tells me how many items that are being displayed. Some people's scripts might not have that parameter, and they would just paginate if they have more items than they can display. This one, I have to set an upper limit here, but in the purposes of this example, it's kind of the same idea. Everybody's scripting is a little bit different, so that's not exactly the purpose of why we have this training set up. Mostly just to show you the steps here. Okay, so now I've set up my display information to display only 2018 items, and I can just simply go back to the index page of the 2018 folder. And then in the main area, I'll just place that asset and publish it out. So now from a live website standpoint, maybe I can go to the news folder, and we can ignore this for right now because that's all of our old items. But I could say, I want to just know what happened in 2018. All right, well, let's just hop to 2018. And then this could be a digest of all of the 2018 items. And if I wanted to, I could go through the navigation and actually read the articles instead of having, to sort through the pagination there. And the same idea, I could go to 2019 and see what items exist there. So I would just do that same exact principle for my 2019 feed and I would have that asset display that information here. So I can use my feed group to aggregate items where I want to aggregate items, such as my homepage. And then I can use the individual feeds to show individual years on other pages. So we have this nice sense of organization now. So with that out of the way, that's kind of the general steps that we would take. This is the general steps that we would take to archive our RSS items from here on outwards. You know, obviously we haven't done anything to change the items that don't belong to those yearly feeds yet, but that's what we'll get to here to wrap up. But what we've done now is we've set ourselves up for success in the future to where we can set that up and have an easily manageable process. Before we talk about how to kind of fix the items that aren't in my yearly feeds just yet, we got a question from Eric who's asked what the difference is between OU blogs and an RSS feed. So that's actually a really good question. It actually can depend customer to customer, but the general principle is that an RSS feed, the structure of RSS that we see here in my raw XML is a kind of a universally defined standard that is not unique to us inside of OU Campus. We actually use the Yahoo RSS standard, which a lot of people use. So it effectively dictates the structure of what's in the XML. Whereas the OU blog solution, when you make a blog post in OU Campus, instead of you having like this, instead of having, here, let me just go to a page real quick. Instead of going to a page and having this extra RSS field right here and this extra item that you can kind of edit independently of the page itself, the blogs don't have this. They instead will usually have other fields, either in multi-edit or maybe page parameters, that allows you to customize kind of that same type of information. And when you publish the page, you just publish two copies of the page, an HTML version and then an XML version. The XML version has a different structure for that raw data that is more unique to what we do. And then ultimately, when you display your blog posts and things like that, the system just runs through that with like a server-side script or something similar to display it. So from a top-level standpoint, there's not very many differences. Both RSS and blogs mean that you have a web page and then an XML version of that web page that just usually contains teaser information. And then some sort of script will grab the XML and display it elsewhere. But if you get into more detail, the differences are mostly in what the structure is for the XML file and whether that is unique to OU Campus or whether it's a more universal standard across the web. And then also kind of the mechanics for how that XML file is generated, whether there's a separate process that puts it into its own little special feed or whether you just are publishing two copies of the page whenever you publish the page. So hopefully that answers your question, Eric. From a large standpoint, there's not too many differences, but it's really just kind of the differences are in the details. Okay, so to wrap up, the last thing that we're going to do today is we're going to go ahead and look at all of the stuff that lives here in my news directory, such as all of these articles, and what we can do to get them into yearly feeds themselves. So we're kind of retroactively archiving as well. Well, the first thing we would need to do is we would need to create a feed for whatever years those items corresponded to. So as I looked earlier, they were all published in 2017. So luckily that makes my life easier for me. I can just do 2017-news.xml. So you might need to make several of those depending on just how many years you're needing to capture. Once again, go down here and max out this. Okay, so that's done. Second step is we would probably want to make yearly folders, just like we were doing in the future. We would do that in the past. So same idea, make a news section, call it 2017. Create that in OU Campus. Cool, okay. Doing good so far. We'll publish this stuff out here. And then the next thing is we would assign the access settings for the old year. What we'd want to do is we'd want to recursively modify it and apply my 2017 newsfeed. And then what we would want to do is we'd want to take all of these items and we would move them into that folder. And it's going to ask me, hey, what do I want to do? I'm going to select move. It's going to move all of those items into the 2017 folders. So from a structure file standpoint, we have things organized appropriately. And then what I would want to do is I would probably actually need to modify the side navigation so these things also get updated. But I could go to each one of these items and I would want to confirm that they belong to the appropriate RSS feed. So I would first of all, actually, before I even click on the page, I would hover over the page and go to Edit Access. And I would see what feed that it belongs to. So if I'm looking at the access settings for a single RSS item, or for a single web page specifically, it doesn't have to be an RSS item, the RSS feed assignment on the page determines what feed those items are belonging to. So even though we moved the feed, the access settings that were applied beforehand are still being applied after we did the move. So what we'd actually probably want to do is I would just go to the 2017 folder again, and then once again just recursively apply the 2017 feed to everything that lives within that folder, just to make sure that any access settings that got carried over from the previous location are now being applied correctly. So yeah, I would just go here and retroactively apply 2017 news to all of them. Now that that's done, I can go back to that same page and look at the access settings. And now we can see the RSS feed has changed from the generic news.xml to 2017 news.xml. So with all of that out of the way, now I can go to the page. And this is just kind of another method to spot check to just confirm that everything's looking good. Is I would go to properties, I would go to RSS. I can see that the feed item exists. I can edit it. And what we'd want to make sure is that this link, the link attribute on an RSS item is how you actually can go here and click on a link and be taken to an actual web page. So we would want to make sure that that link is pointing to the right location and not the old location. If you have the link set to bracket, auto bracket, you can almost see that like a dependency tag to where the link will automatically update if you move a file around. And underneath it, we can confirm that, yes, it looks like this link is pointing me to news/2017/Alumni Campus Fair, which is what we want. We just want to make sure that the link is not trying to redirect me to the old location, which was just news/Alumni Campus Fair. So this is just a spot check method to make sure everything is good, and it looks like that's the case. So with all of that done, we have pretty fair confidence at this point that all of the old items are now in a yearly feed. If I wanted to doubly or triply confirm this, I can then view the XML for that yearly feed, just like we've been doing kind of throughout the rest of this. So now I'm just going to go to 2017 news. It looks like it hasn't been published yet. That might have been my bad. I may not have actually made that live. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just go back to the RSS folder again. And I would go ahead and just republish the entire feed. And now let's go ahead and just hit enter again, and look at this. All of my items now belong to the 2017 news feed. I can scroll through, everything is looking pretty great. And if I want to even more confirm, let's go back to just the generic news.xml file and just make sure that everything got moved out of there successfully. So it looks like they're still in this old news.xml one as well. If I just republish the generic news one, we should see that update. Because effectively, we've published out the new 2017 one, but we haven't essentially told the old one that those items don't live there anymore. So by publishing news.xml one more time and hitting refresh, now we can see that all of the items have been moved out of the old place. So that last thing that I did is technically optional, because as long as they do exist in the new feed, it doesn't really matter if they're still in the old one. But that's just a way to kind of make it cleaner. So to kind of sum up what I just did in response to Sarah's question, basically if you have a bunch of items that you want to put into your yearly feeds that have already been created, what you're going to do is you're going to kind of still do the first couple steps just like you're making a new folder for a future year. You'd make the separate folder in the RSS section. You'd make a separate folder in your news directory. You would assign the new feed to the new directory. And then essentially what you would do is you just take all the items that are meant to go into that new folder. You're going to just move them into the correct directory in OU Campus. And then you're going to recursively edit the access settings for the new folder and change the RSS feed recursively. So hit that second radio button right up here. Then hit the checkbox next to RSS feed and then change it to the correct year. Once that's done, you're going to want to publish out the RSS feed, both the new one and the old one, and that should move things over correctly. And then it's just a matter of spot checking to make sure that the link attributes for each one of the RSS items that you moved, make sure those links did update. So when someone clicks a link when they're looking at that feed, they are going to actually be taken to a real web page and not to a location that no longer exists. But that's just kind of spot checking. You're going to want to spot check a lot when you're doing that process. But the steps to actually put them into monthly or yearly feeds is pretty simple. You know, it's just a matter of doing kind of doing the same steps, and then the additional step of just clicking move or dragging and dropping them into a new directory and applying the new feed. So I hope that's been really helpful for you guys. That's all that I've got for you today. If you want to learn more about how to do this on your own, there's always the recording of this that we're going to place on the OCN and on the support site. But on top of that, I also developed a little step-by-step how-to guide for this for the conference. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that PDF guide, we're going to put it on the OCN and on the support site, so you can reference that as well. It's like about 8 pages long. Alternatively, if you wanted to just grab it, it already lives on the web at outc18.com/workshops. And if you scroll down to the keeping it current with RSS, so the last yellow icon, if you click on the book, there's the PDF that you can download it right now if you want. So like I said, we're going to take this and we're going to put it on the support site and on the OCN as well. So you don't need to remember to go to outc18.com. But if you're just chomping at the bit and you want this right now, head over onto this, download the PDF, and it walks you through the same steps that we did, plus a little refresher course at the beginning. So you can reference that if you want to follow along with the document instead of just trying to track along with a video. So that's what I got for you guys today. Thank you so much. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. But while we do that, I just want to announce that our next Training Tuesday is going to be May 28th. We're going to be talking about accessibility in 2018, and you'll get emails and information about that as you will normally. Actually, the date is May 29th. But yes. 29th, because I'm really good at figuring out dates. I'm sorry. Oh my goodness. Last Tuesday of May, whatever the number is. 29th. Let me just. Okay. Yeah.
And
Okay.
unless there's any further questions, but next month we're gonna have David Morton, who also spoke at the conference, and he's going to be talking about accessibility and what's coming up in 2018, new changes, things to look out for going forward. And be sure to visit support site. OCN will have a registration link up in about a link or so. And unless there are any further questions, one last chance. All right, everybody, that's it. Thank you for attending this month's Training Tuesday. We really appreciate it. I see a raised hand, but that's not a question. If you do have a question, please either use Q&A or the chat function. And if there's nothing else, thank you very much for attending. You can also email us at training@omniupdate.com if you think of something later. All right, here we go. Here's the question. Okay, so Debbie asks, can I get accessibility info before May? If you look at our archive of Training Tuesdays, about a year ago, we did a session on accessibility, which a lot of that info will still be relevant. You can also, again, Brandon showed us the site for the conference, outc18.com, and that, I believe, has the presentations stored on it as well. And there were a couple different presentations on accessibility there that you could look at. But yes, I would say look at our archive of Training Tuesdays on the support site, and you can find a couple different resources there talking about accessibility. And then in May, you will have the freshest, most up-to-date information.
And I think also, just to tack on to what Erica said, the presentations from the first 2 days of this year's conference, where there was also a lot of discussions about accessibility, I believe those presentations are also posted on the OCN. So if you are not a member of the OCN already, email us at ocn@omniupdate.com and we'll invite you. It's totally free to join. But other than that, you should be able to get some resources on the OCN before our May Training Tuesday as well.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and we will see you all next month.